All right, everybody. So before I dump you into this video that I just spent the last hour recording, I had a gain setting wrong on my wireless mic. So the audio is a little hot in the clip, but I didn't want to go and reshoot a whole nother hour's worth of driving around and re-editing the video. So I must have bumped the button on the Rode system and put it on a 20 dB gain. So it's a little clippy, but it works good. So I padded it as best I could in Premiere, and I think we got a winner here. So enjoy the follow-up to Moab, enjoy the 1 year of owning the Jeep, and let's roll the footage.
All right, morning everybody. It is Sunday, the 24th of May. Hope everybody's having a great Memorial weekend, staying out of trouble. Trying to beat the rain here today. It's supposed to rain this afternoon. It's all cloudy and kind of cool. Not uncommon for late May, but it was beautiful yesterday. But this is the Moab Mother of All Birthdays Trip 2020 follow-up, and I've got some questions about how the Jeep did, how I like the 2-liter turbocharged inline 4 motor paired with the 35s, etc., etc. So figured we would talk about that today, and we'll do some 0 to 60s. I've never done that in this vehicle. There's a straightaway north of my neighborhood that should be sufficient to hit 60 on, and I'll show you guys the underside damage to the Jeep. It's not terrible. There's a little bit, but it's not terrible. I went into this trip knowing fair well that I was going to get into the bottom of it, and I did not hit it nearly as much as I thought that I would, which is good. But first, let's talk about how the trip even happened to begin with, because everybody knows what's going on right now, and apparently if you say the word, YouTube messes with your channel. So I'm not going to mention the word, but we all know it starts with a C. Well, the Southeast Utah Health Department, which controls the 3 counties in and around Moab, I forget their names, but Moab's in Grand County, Utah, they were closed to all lodging. You couldn't disperse to camp, you couldn't stay in a hotel, you couldn't stay in a vacation rental, Airbnb, VRBO, whatever. Well, we booked a VRBO quite some time ago. So when all this stuff happened, we were fairly certain that we weren't going to be able to go. VRBO, not very helpful. They basically bowed out of the conversation with Vacasa, who owned the property that we were staying in Utah, and let them handle it directly with us. The reservation was not in my name, it was in somebody else's. I don't have a VRBO account, but we were within the cancellation window of 0 refund, and I mean 0. Even sending them the health department orders that stated we can't legally come stay there, they did not care. So after multiple conversations that other friends that were going had with this company, they agreed to give us a credit for a future stay. Originally their policy was up to a year in advance, and they extended it out to 18 months in advance. To get 8 people's schedules to line up to take an 8-day trip to Utah is difficult. If you've ever tried to coordinate a trip like that, you understand that it's difficult. So it was my idea to go on this trip because it fell on my birthday and I wanted to go do something really fun. And current world events, we're having that in jeopardy. So literally at 0 day, April 30th, that health department opened up Moab. They opened up lodging. You still could not disperse to camp, but that did not affect us because I have a particular food allergy that is extremely difficult to accommodate at restaurants. And cooking my own food with the group for the week was extremely important to me, so I didn't have to risk being sick for my birthday week in Moab. I have never had a Jeep in Moab before, so I was really looking forward to this trip. The rest of the group that I usually off-road with goes in the fall, and that just does not work for me right now. I am way too busy in the fall with customer duties. That just doesn't work. So, gist of the story is, if you're going to rent from VRBO, get their trip insurance. We were not going to cancel this trip, irregardless of no matter what. But the health department put the kibosh on rentals, so that was kind of screwing us over. But luckily we got to go. It was super weird. We had Moab virtually to ourselves. We got there the second day that it was open to the public. So nobody was there. They opened it on May 1st, and we rolled out at 8 o'clock on May 2nd and had every single trail to ourselves. Hell's Revenge, Hell's Gate. We bumped into a couple people at Hell's Gate, but we had already gone through with the rigs that we were going to go through with. But we saw nobody on Top of the World, almost nobody on Hell's Revenge, literally nobody on Metal Masher. We saw nobody on Jack's Tracks. We did see a couple people on Fins and Things, but they were side by sides. So there was some folks out there, but the internet was full of people giving out misinformation on how Moab was closed and you can't go there and it was illegal. No, that was not true. We were there May 2nd through the 9th, and it was an absolute blast. So I am almost to my destination. I'm running a couple errands here, and I will grab this camera and show the underside of the Jeep and the hits that it took. Then we'll talk about fuel economy, even what it's getting right now. I departed for this trip and the Jeep had 4,800 miles on it. Don't really consider engines to be broken in until 5 to 10. Basically when you're on that second oil change, maybe third depending on your driving. But I am sitting at 6,080 miles on the odometer, and currently on, this is a fill up, I haven't driven this much, 21.5 mile per gallon on 35s. I have 15 miles on it, and it's all been just around town. But we'll talk about overall trip fuel economy. I will show you pictures. I took pictures of the dash driving back from Utah with like 100-something miles on the trip meter, and then I left the B-side roll for the entire trip, to and from, wheeling, etc. So let me get pulled in here and check what I need to check here real quick, and then I will show you the underside of the Jeep. A lot of this was already here prior to going to Moab, but on this was my spare that got rotated in shortly before the trip, so as you can tell, it didn't get hit. Couple of things here. That is a fresh one from the trip. I do not know where I hit that, but could have been any one of the numerous rocks we were climbing up, probably on Top of the World. And then same thing on the front here. This one is a fresh one, so that's a fresh hit from Moab. That was already there prior to the trip. So underneath, let's go back around. Underneath, I got to get my screen to turn back on. Hopefully you can see that. I hit the control arm mounts. They've started to rust up a little bit because I went through the car wash. But I hit the control arm mounts on coming off of a bunch of ledges, and then I got into the transmission cross member multiple times, and the big one is the fuel tank skid plate. So there's some pretty good scrapes all the way down that, and we will go over to the other side. Oh, and I got the tailpipe. That's the first time I've hit the tailpipe on anything. So I got the tailpipe, and then I got the, whatever this resonator is on the exhaust. I scraped on that pretty good, but most of those marks are gone already because I've washed this thing. And then I also hit the lower hanging points like the control arm mounts. So not too much damage. I got this one here. I got to turn the screen back on. I got this one here in Moab. I actually hit this one hard enough that I bent it up. You can see it's got a little knurl there on it now. So not too shabby for 2 inches of lift and 35-inch tires. And these aren't even true 35s. These are the metric equivalent. So they're running approximately 34.25 according to the speedometer, and that's pretty dead on at 70 miles an hour. So I'm pretty happy with that. The Toyo Open Countries did pretty good with the siping on the lugs. So let's go. Let's see, is there anything else? I don't think so. I changed the diff fluid before the trip just because it had never been done. That steering brace really stiffened up the interstate travel. That went quite smoothly. I wasn't fighting the Jeep a lot, and we were driving in some pretty nasty wind. So let's go do some more driving and maybe some 0 to 60s. This engine on the Jeep was definitely not fully broken prior to this trip. We took the scenic way into Moab, and so it was a little over 7 hours. That included a lunch pit stop in Eagle Vale along I-70. There's a Qdoba there that I like to stop at if I'm ever in the area and eat lunch. It's one of the few places I can actually eat. And the 1,300 miles that we put on really loosened up this engine. For a while there, I was running the Mishimoto oil catch can, and that kept throwing check engine lights. They were super, super helpful, but ultimately it comes down to Jeep just not. The sensor on this thing is so ridiculous. It kept throwing the check engine light. So I had the can bypassed for a while, and I decided to just ultimately take it off. I'm just one of those people that I can't have a friggin' idiot light staring at me in the dash. I just can't do it. So I took that off. I was running their cold air intake for a while, and I noticed a rough idle at elevation. Don't know why. It just would idle rough at elevation. It was weird. So I took that off, and I'm completely back to 100% stock engine, stock air intake, you know, really good like CarQuest style pleated air filter, and yeah, 21.2, but that's on 16 miles. So the overall trip average, actually, let me pause this here for a minute until I get to where I want to do some 0 to 60, but I wanted to keep talking about that air intake before I lost my train of thought on that. So I was running the Mishimoto air intake. They sent that to me at zero cost. It was a prototype at the time. I'm not 100% sure if it went to market yet or not, but I was noticing above 9,000 feet at idle, the Jeep was kind of idling weird. It was vibrating, and I thought, that's kind of odd. I don't know why it's doing that. I took that air intake back off, and it's never done it since. So I don't know what that was, but their air intake opened up the low-end torque on this engine phenomenally. I'm not a terribly big fan of those high-flow air filters because high-flow tends to be higher dirt content going into your engine. I have run those K&N style filters before, and you can stick your hand in the air intake and wipe out dirt on your fingers after 20,000-30,000 miles of driving. So I'm not a huge fan of those. I've had some premature engine wear on an older truck of mine that I traded in a while back. Not for the Power Wagon, it was the truck even prior to that I had for that white F-150. That truck started burning oil, what I would consider heavily, a little over a quart. Just under 3,000 mile oil change, it would be down a quart. So that's well within the tolerance of that engine, but I didn't like it. And the only thing I could attribute that to was the amount of dirt that was in that air intake. So I took that air intake off. It's sitting downstairs in my storage room. I've never heard if they finished designing that and released it or not. If there was any changes to it. They were supposed to ship me the changes, and then I could put it back on and experiment with it again, but they never did. So not sure where we stand on that. But this engine has a little bit of a gas pedal lag right when you step on the gas pedal. It's not bad. I've driven turbo engines before, and it's not horrible. You have to know and accommodate for that. But I am almost to where I want to do those 0 to 60s, so I wanted to say that before I forgot. So I'm going to shut this back off until I get a few more miles down the road. There was a guy on a bicycle that was pedaling, so I am actually going to wait for, there's one car coming. I don't want to go blowing by somebody at 60 mile an hour here, so I'm going to wait for this car. So I am going to come to a stop and brake torque it. Okay, so there's 11.42. I have never once ever done a 0 to 60 pull in the Jeep, so that was traction control on, a little bit of brake torquing, stock gears, 410 gears on 35s. So I'm going to go down here to the end and turn around and do it again, and this time I'm going to shut traction control off, and in fact I'll shut it off now. Actually, come on baby, there we go. So I'm going to turn around and do it again. Okay, so the cars in front of me are well enough in advance. All right, here we go. 0 to 60, brake torque, traction control off, wide open throttle. That was actually a worse pull. Interesting. Well, there you have it. It's like 11.4 and then a 13.1, 0 to 60. So that's on the 35-inch tires and the stock gears. So let me get all this reset here, and we'll close this out. Okay. So even with that romping around and doing a couple of 0 to 60 pulls, I'm still at 20 miles to the gallon. So the Jeep on the interstate, going all the way to Utah and back in Colorado, most of I-70 is in that anywhere from 45 near Glenwood Springs to 65 through most of the whole thing. So the Jeep was staying in 8th gear a lot, which if you're in, any kind of hilly terrain, this thing hunts around really hard for gears, but it was staying in 8th gear a lot, which I think is attributing to why the fuel economy was so good on this trip. Over 1,300 miles to pull 18 and a half. When I fill up, it's usually not off more than about a half a mile to the gallon either direction. So this thing could have got 18 or it could have got 19 for the whole 1,300 miles. But irregardless, 18 and a half there and back on the metric 35s is phenomenal. Zero complaints. I've had this Jeep for a year. that 2-liter engine, it doesn't sound very good. I mean, it sounds like you're driving a vacuum cleaner, but I mean, to carry, you can hear that turbo whoosh on this thing. Hopefully you can, if it's picking it up in my lapel mic, but it's a phenomenal vehicle. There's been a lot of skepticism on the longevity of this, and I think it's a semi-trusted, tested platform. This engine is in other vehicles. I think they tweaked it for this chassis, but no, nothing to worry about here at all. Am I going to go to 37s? I don't know. I hardly ever touch the bottom of this thing wheeling here in Colorado, and we've got some pretty interesting trails and obstacles that we can drive on here in northern Colorado. Nothing like Moab, but I took this with my military trailer up Bald Mountain and hardly touched the bottom of it, and we were driving up some pretty serious rocks, so not sure what I'm going to do there. But irregardless, thanks for coming along. Hope you have a great Memorial weekend, and as soon as I get back out and do some more four-wheeling, you will come along.